see, I think we should be going live shortly.
Okay.
Let me just check if we're on. Okay, I think we are on. We're just waiting for some people to join. Just until then, we're just gonna say greetings.
Okay.
Like one thing in here, the connection is right. One more thing. ሰላም ሰላም ሁላችሁም። የዛሬው ፕሮግራማችን በእንግሊዝኛ ነው የሚሆነው። ፕሮግራሙን የገባን ቼክ እስከምናደርግ ድረስ ትንሽ እንድታግሱን እንጠይቃለን። ኦኬ ጤና ይስጥልኝ። ፕሮግራማችን ዛሬ የምንጀምረው በእንግሊዝኛ ነው። Today, our program is going to be in English. This is Yoftahe Mulatu from Boston, Massachusetts, in collaboration with Abba Media. So, greetings to all of you. Tonight's program is going to be a little bit of a sensitive program. So, it's not meant for kids, but this is a program that we want to be able to talk about, especially with the political and then atmosphere that we have running in Ethiopia in our country. We have to be able to learn from other African nations or any other place that civil wars, terrors that have been happening. So today I have a guest, Abdul from Sierra Leone. He's going to tell us about his childhood and how the Sierra Leone civil war affected him and his family, and to this day, how he traveled to Gambia and then settled to Canada. So Abdul, I want to say welcome. From Sierra Leone. He's going to tell us about his channel. Some of the people are starting to join. So salam salam, greetings to all of you. So tonight's conversation, like I said, it's about civil wars, children being forced to be in a war, families being separated. So it's going to be sensitive and it's not for kids, but let's have a discussion and understand what we can prevent before it's too late. So once again, Abdul, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live, and then we will go on deep a little bit in the discussions.
So I'm Abdul. Currently, I'm in Winnipeg, Manitoba, so that's in Canada. I've been here for 16 years now. So, yeah, I've been here a while.
Here a while. Okay.
Yeah. I came here as a refugee from Sierra Leone.
You were born in Sierra Leone. Okay.
Yes.
So, once again, thank you. Tonight, you willing to come in and talk about what you went through. It's a very sensitive area of your life. So I'm really grateful that you're willing to share this so the world can learn, so we don't forget. Even the title says the boy memory that remembers. So there are a lot of things that we're going to be talking about. So before we go into the deep, dark side of humanity, tell us, when was the first, do you remember the childhood, the beautiful childhood growing up as it was supposed to be? So tell us a little bit about that time.
So I grew up in a very small town. That town's name is Sirabo. It's in the southern part of Sierra Leone. My parents and mostly everyone in that community were farmers, right? So we farmed. That's how my parents put food on the table. So like when I was younger, of course, parents used to take me to the farm, and the memories that I do remember is like playing outside with my friends, and I remember when we used to play, a plane would we hear like airplane sounds, and whenever we heard that sound, we ran outside and we stand there looking at the plane fly for until it was like out of sight, right? So, and I remember at the place where I'm from, it's a very small community, so everyone kind of knows each other, right? So we are what I used to say is that that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. So so I could be somewhere misbehaving, and then an auntie will see me, that I'm not fully related to them, but if I'm not being respectful or behaving the way I should be, I usually got disciplined on that spot. And then I got disciplined again when I came home. So it was such a small town that someone knew my parents, right? And they knew that I shouldn't be behaving in that way. So that's how small it was.
We all remember, we all know the African, I mean,
Yeah,
take the
yeah,
to raise a child. So we all remember those good moments.
yeah,
So at some moment, at some part of your childhood, things started changing.
yeah.
You remember how old you were when things started getting a little bit more difficult? Let me put it that way for now.
Yes. So I was like 7 when the war fully started. But before like we started experiencing any sort of violence, um, people used to from neighboring villages, we used to come by. Sometimes they had bundles on their heads. Sometimes people were just running, and looking at their faces, they were very scared. And sometimes like family members or so pull them over, like like stop them in their tracks and be like, "Oh, where are you guys going? Why so many people kind of like just going in one direction? What's happening?" So, and then for a few seconds or so, they'll stop, and then they'll tell you that that people were dying, and that there were people who were amputating people, and you know killing, pretty much. So it's just like you hear those things. I remember my parents would hear it, and it was hard to kind of believe because growing up, we never saw things like that, right? We never heard anything like that. The most thing closest to violence you see is two people quarreling, and then sometimes they fight, but the fights are not like ending up with somebody like dead, right? So when we hear those things like people were getting amputated, it was kind of hard to believe. So I remember
Before
in
we
the
get into
evenings.
the before we get in, for some people who don't know where Sierra Leone is, so that we
Yeah.
can give them some time frame of
Yes.
the Civil War, if you can tell us where Sierra Leone is compared to Africa's map, and
Okay.
then we can talk how a little bit walking in into when the war or the reason the war started.
Yeah, yeah. So Sierra Leone is in the western part of Africa. We are very close to, this Liberia, Guinea, Gambia, so Senegal in that area. So it's a very, very tiny country. And I later on learned more about the war when I came here, right? So the war itself was political in nature, right? So it was a power struggle between a person who was already in power and then another individual who wanted to overthrow the government, right? So not being able to do that, they retired back in the villages, right? So, and by the time the war fully started, it was around like 1995, 96, right? So the war started in the villages. So the stories that I'm telling you now is like this is long before the war even reached the city, right? Because most people know about the war when it got to Freetown, which is the city of Sierra Leone, right? So, but the
What city
people
were
who
you
were
from? What
sorry.
city are you from? Your city, your
My
village.
city, the village I'm from is it's called Sirabu, right? Sirabu, and it's 100 miles away from Freetown.
Okay.
The closest city to us is called Bo, B-O, and Bo is about 32 miles or so. So yeah, the war itself began in the smaller towns and stuff like that. So, and that's why if you go to Sierra Leone now, the city is very crowded because when the war started, people fled those villages, and then they fled to the city, and a lot of people lost their lives in that during that journey, right? And after the war was done, a lot of people who went there never back home, you know. So they stayed in the city. So when you're there, it is very crowded, and so
Tell us the little thing that you started seeing while you were in the village before
mhm,
you moved on to the city, where
mhm,
where you lived. What are the first thing that you started seeing things were changing and trouble
mhm.
coming?
So I mentioned that, you know, we were, you know, having people walk by our town and telling us all these things that we didn't believe at first. So, but by the time we realized that this reality was actually true, for most it was too late. Myself and my family, so that's my dad, my mom, my brother, older brother, and I had another little brother named Suleiman, and then my grandmother. By the time a lot of people realized it was too late, but we managed to scramble to escape. So it was during the evening, and all we heard was like gunshots. And I remember people were screaming and running from one place to the other. So my father called me amongst all that chaos and then picked me up, put me on the shoulder. So it was during the rainy season too. So usually the rivers flood. And yeah, so the most people usually do is you found the nearest bush that you could find, and then run into it, and then try to find some sort of safety. So, but during that time, we have a river there that usually in the rainy season it rises very high, and sometimes it goes over the bridge, right? The bridge that the cars drive over. So that was exactly what happened. So when that evening, when we heard those gunshots, the first thing we did was we tried to run out of the village, but you have to cross that bridge before you go. So when we got to the bridge, we realized that the water was already over and the current was very fast. So no individual is going to be able to kind of cross it by foot, right? So but what we did was, I mentioned we're farmers. So usually when that happens, people will build bridges in the trees, right, on the other side of the
Yeah.
water, and then they will use that to cross the river, go to their farm and cross it and come back at home that night. So my dad knew about that bridge, so we took that route, and I remember it was a bit darker now, so as we were crossing that bridge, you could hear people screaming, and you would hear like a loud scream, and then all of a sudden their voice will fade away, and you kept hearing that over and over again. And even though I was a bit little, I kind of understood what exactly was happening. So people were drowning, and most of the elders who couldn't run very far didn't know about this, and they try, because like at that very moment you just want to get away, right? So, and you could use whatever road it is as long as it gets you to safety, but then for most people that didn't happen. So, and I remember when we were crossing that little bridge, my brother, because my mom had my brother Suleiman, who was probably two then, on her back. So, and after my dad had like taken us across the bridge, myself, my brother, and my grandma, he went back for my mom. I remember we're standing there, kind of waiting for them to come, and we couldn't hear them. So, after waiting for a while, we saw my mom coming, and she was drenched in water, right? And then my grandmother got my brother from her back, and they tried to dry him. So what had happened was my mom slipped and fell in the water, and my brother was behind her back. So my dad was fighting to kind of like pull her up back on the bridge. And after we left, the following day we went to the closest village that was close to us. So like when we went there, my brother's like body was warm, and the very evening he passed away. I remember all I did was like I left him for a bit, because that whole day I was kind of like just sitting beside him and no wanting to leave or move. So the minute I left, I heard my mom scream, and when I came back, people were kind of like gathered, in the room, and I tried to fight to get to the front, and my mother was holding my brother. So but that evening they bathed him and buried him. So the first death I saw in the war was my little brother. And from that time on, things just began to change. And
I'm sorry to hear that you lost your brother at that young age, and then you should not have been exposed to something like that. So just like you said, things started changing. So what is it the call it the rebels were asking from all of you, and what kind of techniques or tactics were they using to scare people and go from village to village?
so you try to kind of like wrap your mind around exactly what was happening, right? So um the one thing you can do is rest for a long time. So we were always on the move. So we're moving from one place to the other. And usually when you ran, uh, you know, uh, um, came across other people, right? They can tell you exactly what it is that happened in other areas, right? So let's say the rebels attacked another village that they were there, so you knew not to go in that direction. So until this day, I'm grateful for my father because he was the one that was able to kind of like navigate and kind of tell us where to go. But um, the time when you really started to fear for your own life was, sometimes the first time we came across a body was you could hear like flies kind of buzzing right from afar. But the one thing that you noticed before you even heard the flies was the smell, right? So and what we used to do was we'll cover our nose, cover our nose till like we came past that body, and then we're like maybe a little bit far from it, to the point that where you can breathe and not smell. Because the human body, when it decays, the smell itself is terrible. So but you always heard those flies first. And sometimes you came across like villages where before you entered the village, you could see like human heads placed on spikes, right? And it will be in rows. And it's just like, for me, I could never look away because as a child, I was very curious, right? You could look at every detail of that person's face, and you could look at the face and realize that certain parts of the it's just, and you could always see flies were just engulfed everywhere, right? So it's just those kind of
You
things. Yeah.
mentioned that you saw dead bodies on a spine. So who
Mhm.
would be? So they would be beheading the heads, and then they start
Yes.
putting them on this just on the road.
Yes.
Who would
So
be?
literally they would it's often to set an example, right? Because they actually did that. There was a point in time when we were in the village, and what the rebels used to do was they would hold civilians as hostages, right? So they could take over a village and then leave some people alive, and sometimes they get you to do their bidding. So, but to set an example, so sometimes when they have you in that village, you're not allowed to leave, right? So, and there are certain rules that they put in place, and if someone violated those rules, they will make an example out of you. And I'll tell you one or two stories. So there was this man specifically. I don't know how he died, but they placed his head just right by that road that we usually use to go to the farm. They placed that head on that spike, and every day you would walk by that person, like will go, and then over time you see the face started to kind of like fall apart. And it's just those are the kind of things that they did. There was also another time where, so we were in Sirabu then, right? So, and they told everyone not to leave the village because one of the fear was that if you leave, you will give their whereabouts, right? So nobody was allowed to leave. But then on the other side of the village, there was a young man who kind of didn't listen. Specifically, we don't know what he left the town for. But as soon as he left, the rebels kind of noticed. So they waited for him to come back. And I remember one evening, we're just kind of like sitting around in the front yard, and we saw the wife of this man, walking with a basket on her head, right? So And then behind her, we could hear the rebels kind of like, they had a mic in their hand. This is what happens when somebody defies us. And they were playing drums, and this lady was kind of like crying and walking in front of them, right? So, and as this lady was getting closer, we were wondering what was happening, right? Because we knew her. And she was walking with, and the closer she came, you could see blood dripping on her shoulders and on her face. And yeah, as she was walking by, they paraded with her like all through the town, from one end of the town to the other. So what had happened was when that man came back in front of the wife and the son, and while he was still alive, they chopped him into pieces. And the people who were at that other side of the village were the ones that saw it. So, because no one was allowed to leave their house, so the neighbors were the one that saw it. So they chopped this man into pieces, and they placed his body parts in a basket, so this woman can carry from one time. And they were just behind him, like just beating drums, like a masquerade, like somebody dancing. So it's terrible. And those kind of things would instill fear into you. And I one can't really do anything, so because you can end up like that.
So, like you said, it's fear, but whenever we hear it, we don't think like human beings are capable of doing this kind of, I don't know what to call it. I don't want to just call it a crime, but being this barbaric and going to this level. From what you have seen at that time, I mean, these are like sometimes we consider normal people. What do you think make them resort to being this barbaric and not caring for any human being, and then to the point they start killing, not only just killing, but chopping heads and putting that. So what do you think that was turning them into this kind of evil people?
Yeah. So for the longest time, like we try to wrap our minds around it, because most of the people that did these things, like you knew them, right? Like someone knew them, right? So and what had happened was like, um in the earlier stages, like children were being forced to commit acts that were like unthinkable, right? So um over time, like literally, like we would, the war was done, we would sit around and would tell stories, right? And chances are someone's story can relate to yours in a way, because a perpetrator who did something to their family might be the same person who did something to yours, right? So these are people who grew up in our communities, right? These are people who grew up in neighboring villages. So because the rebels were using civilians, they were using innocent people to join these causes and stuff like that, and then have them do unthinkable things, right? So um, it was hard to understand that the people who were doing this were actually people who you knew, right? So for the longest time it was, but by then nobody knew that the war was political itself, right? So we just knew that, hey, you have to run away and you have to survive. So it was like later on when I came here and you started to learn about the children being used as child soldiers, and propaganda being used, right? At the beginning, where a child could be forced to kill uh, his or her family, and then what they would say is that the government is the one responsible for this, and the only way you can, get revenge for your family is to take up arms and fight the government, right? So, in that case, you are now given a cause, right? You're now given a purpose, and as a child, you may not really understand what this purpose is, right? But you have an adult behind you who is telling you to do things that are unthinkable. But when you do these things, there's no repercussions. Nothing is happening to you, right? So it becomes okay. So over time, that scale of violence just increases, right? And for some, it was an opportunity, because in any circumstances, like someone that had a gun had so much power that, you know, you that don't, right? If they tell you to lay down flat on the ground, you're doing it, right? If they tell you to roll over, you're doing it. So um, for some, it gave them an opportunity, right, to commit acts like you can rape somebody and nothing happens, right? So in that very sense, it becomes, okay, right? But for most of what was happening was like someone was behind these things, right? A message was being given, and these messages were carried out in ways that we still can't get over to today, and we're trying to understand still.
I think you explained it, but I mean, I think it was one question. What makes, I mean, these are people that you lived it together, and then at some point you think it's okay to go around and kill your neighbors. It's okay to kill. What do you think? I know we will never have an answer for it, but what was the kind of propaganda, I mean, you mentioned, that turned someone considered normal at some point to turn in and be that cruel?
Yeah, it's for me, I can't, it's hard to kind of like fathom really, because if you think about some of the acts that were committed, it's hard to even, because even if I think about propaganda in a way too, right? It's like, at some point in time, the person you're killing must look completely different to you, right? You might not even see them as human anymore, or they might just look like an animal to you, right? Because these things have been instilled in your brain for a very long time. So it's just like, for me, till this day, I still can't understand how, another human being watching you in the eye, right, begging you, because these are things that were happening. Like, people will beg for their lives before it's taken, right? People will tell you, oh, aren't we brothers and sisters? They're begging you, oh, I know your mother, I know this person, and then they still carry out these things, right? So I feel like in such circumstances, right, a lot of people can use it as an opportunity, and that's exactly what it was. Like, they had a cause, and they needed people to forward these causes, right? So it's just like learning about it now when I'm a lot older, you're a bit angry because innocent kids were being used, right? Till this day, they're the ones that are going to have to live with this, because those kids are still in our community. They're not kids anymore, right? These are adults, and they're still kind of like living with us. And we have grown to kind of like forgive and live together. But then I only wonder how they might be, nightmares, because I used to have those when I came here. So it's just like theirs might even be worse than mine. So it's just hard to understand, really.
It is definitely hard to understand. I mean, just like you said, I'm sorry that you had to go through this as a child and then remembering all of this. I want to show you actually, because the reason I wanted to do for some of the followers, some viewers, trying to understand, do we ever learn being sensitive and understanding? So there is a similar thing almost a little bit happening in Ethiopia, and a lot of killings, a lot of neighbors going around and killing people they grew up together with, and then what made them turn to that point. Let me show you actually a video,
Okay.
and then we can talk about that. Um, can you see the screen?
Yes, yes.
Over 230 people in the Oromia region of Ethiopia were dragged out of their homes, beaten, paraded, humiliated, and killed.
የኛ ሆቴል ሻሸመኔ ላይ ባለ 3 ኮከብ ሆቴል ነው። መዋኛው ምኑ ያለው ኦልሞስት ሙሉ በሙሉ በሚባል ሁኔታ እሱ በቃ ወድሟል። ኤግዛክት ፊገሩ እስከ 290 ሚሊዮን ይደርሳል።
What happened, you ask? On June 29th, 2020, Hachalu Hundessa, a noted Ethiopian performing artist and a political activist, was shot to death in his car in Ethiopia's capital city, Addis Ababa. He was a prominent figure in the Oromo community who used his music to advocate for political change. When news of Achalu's death broke, some political activists accused the Nefteñas, a pejorative term to describe those of Amhara's descent and Orthodox Christians living in the Oromia region of Ethiopia. Of the assassination and called for the murder and expulsion of non-Oromos from the region.
Certain prominent extremists, Oromo nationalists from academia, politics, and the media joined in calling for revenge, killing, and ethnic cleansing, and broadcast this over social media and the airwaves.
Amara Kali, kill Amaran people, kill Ornaftanya, kill Tigray, all.
Responding to these calls, violent elements within the Oromia region began a campaign of terror in which they targeted Amharas and Orthodox Christians and went after other non-Oromo residents of the region, killing them and destroying properties. They also attacked any Oromos that tried to protect their non-Oromo neighbors, especially Christian Oromos. Oromo Orthodox Christians have been labeled Nefteña and are increasingly targeted for attacks in some parts of the Oromia region.
Tragically, this latest incident follows another violent episode less than 8 months earlier that resulted in the deaths of over 80 people, with extremist mobs going on rampage, killing, maiming non-Oromo residents, and destroying property, clearly showing the escalation and the range and severity of the attacks.
ምክንያት 86 ሰዎች ሞተዋል። ምን ነው ለህዝብ ባላሳወቅኩ ኖሮ ይሄ ሁሉ ሰው ከሚሞት ብለው ተሰምቶታል። ግን ቢያንስ ሪግሬት አድርገዋል በዚህ ጉዳይ ነው አልተሰማውም።
What is making each incident worse than the last is the increasingly organized nature of these attacks. Elements within the regional security and other governmental bodies reportedly turn a blind eye and actively encourage this violence. The federal government, in the aftermath of the last episode of bloodshed, has arrested many officials of local and regional government for complicity in these violent acts.
Police አስፈላጊውን እርምጃ ወስዶ በቁጥጥር ስር አውሏቸው የተጀመረ መሆኑን መግለጽ እወዳለሁ። 8 ክላሽ፣ 5 ሽጉጥ፣ 9 የመገናኛ ሬዲዮኖች የተያዙ ሲሆን
The government shut down the internet in Ethiopia during this recent upheaval in an effort to stop the incitement from diaspora sources that were calling for more violence against Nefteña and settlers in the Oromia region, and to minimize news that could lead to reprisal elsewhere.
This is what you should know. In the 2 weeks after Hachalu Hundesa's death, over 230 people lost their lives in modern-day lynchings. Many women, men, children, elderly non-Oromos raped, beaten, mutilated, their throats cut, and burned.
Thousands have been displaced from their homes and taken refuge in churchyard. Large towns have been gutted as the mob set fire to schools, businesses, and homes. Most of the people have lived in their towns for generations and have now been told they needed to leave. This is the very definition of ethnic cleansing. Oromia is the most diversely settled region in Ethiopia. There are over 10 million non-Oromo Ethiopians currently living in Oromia region and have lived there for centuries. We have seen this before in the country not far from Ethiopia.
The world ignored the sign of impending genocide in Rwanda, and for that, almost 1 million people died in 100 days. What we cannot stand for is the slaughter of human beings like cattle yet again. We cannot look the other way, nor should you. The dire situation does not have to end in further bloodshed. You can be the difference this time.
Please write and call your congressional.
So let me stop it there and then ask for your opinion when you see what do you remember, or how can you relate to what you were going through in your village? People who grew up together, and now because of different codes are starting to kill neighbors and telling them they don't belong there. So what can you teach us, or what can you tell us from what was in Sierra Leone compared to what's happening right now in Ethiopia?
I think for me, I went back, the first time I went back after leaving Sierra Leone was, 2010, right? So, but like recently when I got there, right? I started like having a bit of worries, right? Because we all know what the war did to the country. And until this day, we're still recovering from it, right? So, and what is now happening is that the way our political systems are, like we vote based on our tribes, is more tribally based, right? So the troubling thing about that is like people for years have been voting based on the tribe that they were born into, right? So it's just, and that's how it is, and we're being divided. And usually, what happens is during those campaigns, there's a bit of violence here and there, right? And the people who are usually used are the youths, right? And the ones that use them most of the time are not even in the country, right? So they use these youths to forward, like the same thing I was talking about, how rebels, the leaders used children and innocent civilians to forward their causes, right? It's the same thing that's happening right now, right? Kids are being used to, and youths are being used, like the ones that are not even working, because the country is in a place where a lot of youths are just idling in the streets, right? So if you give them a purpose, and even, well, let's say it's when you convert the money from here to there, like you give them a little bit of money here, they see it as big, and then you kind of point them where to go, right? So watching that video is very troubling because, you know, young youths are being used in a way, because some of the messages that they're giving, like let's cut off their heads and do all these things, is very troubling, right? And I just wonder where that is coming from. Like, you wonder, like, what's making that person say that? So there has to be something behind it. There has to be a message that's being sent, making the people they're talking about look less human, right? So, and for me, that's what it is. And what I would probably say is that, usually people start regretting these things after the war has happened and lives have been changed. So after the war was done, in a way, like we sat down and we told our stories amongst each other, and we realized how tragic our lives were, right? We realized how, much our lives changed, because many would sit down and wait for their children who were forced to partake in these wars, and they never came back, right? So the video itself is sad and it's troubling. So I feel like people should really, pay attention to it, right? Because if no one puts a stop to the source of these hate, it's just going to build and build. And by the time you know it, people are going to be in the streets committing these acts. And it's just sad to see.
One person asked a question, Mahalit is asking, I had read that rebels were using civilians as human shields in their military operation and to ensure that they stayed on their sides, using child soldiers to recruit soldiers. And not sure about Sierra Leone, but Charles Taylor, who was the head of government in Liberia, also started using child soldiers. The children oftentimes were dragged high and showed violent movies so that they become desensitized. It's really sad, she said. So in your country, Sierra Leone, the same thing were happening because kids 12, 13 years old were being recruited. Can you talk about a little bit about how they were getting kids to the point of having them kill their own parents?
So for me, I'm glad I never saw that specifically, right? But I think like being around violence so much, it became normal for us, right? So seeing a dead body wasn't something that you freaked out about anymore, right? So I feel like once you're in a place, you're forced to do an act that you can never come back from, right? It's anything else that, like, if somebody forces you to kill your parents, right? Anything that comes after that now can't really be as terrible as you know that would be. I mean, losing a human, like taking a human life itself is terrible just to begin with, right? But to take the lives of those who gave birth to you is just unthinkable. So my uncle was taken, right? My uncle was taken. Until this day, my grandmother, who's still alive, has waited for years and years for him to come back. And that's something that, for us, for most of us, we gave up on that a very long time ago. But till this day, she still believes her son is alive in somewhere, right? So, but I feel like I would really want to understand how these children got to that point. But for sure, they were using drugs, and like, if you're given an ultimatum, do this or you die. I think in most situations, you're gonna pick the other one, right? So it's to, like, I'm still trying to understand, and we're still trying to heal, but we don't really talk about these things. We stopped talking about the war a very long time ago, but this is very good that you're doing, because others need to hear, because um, we usually come to these things when years and years have passed and it's too late, right? And by then, all we can do is like sympathy. Like, we're like, oh, as if this happened, but we should get to it before it becomes something like what happened in our country, right? So
I'm glad. Thank you again. Like I said, I didn't want to bring up so many wins and hurts from you, but you talking about this, I don't want people to miss it so that we can learn it. You said when the killings were happening in the villages, the cities, because they didn't see it, they didn't think it was that bad or nothing was happening.
They didn't believe it.
Yeah, they didn't believe it because it wasn't happening to them. So in your case, you had to flee and you had to run away from village to village to get to city, free town, to be able. And then people woke up at some point to say, oh, this is terrible, we should have acted. So was there anything that you could say, just like you were talking about it, when it's not only when we see 1,000 deaths, it's like the first deaths should shock us and we should do something about it to stop it at that moment before it turns in. Like you said, you're desensitized. You start seeing deaths after death. You think it's the new norm and you start accepting so many deaths. And I don't want also Ethiopia to turn it into the same thing. So what would be the kind of advice, this kind of killing that's starting to happen, when should we or how should we get involved to say, this is real, this is happening, you need to wake up and believe it?
I think now the world that is so much bigger in a way, because social media has allowed us to kind of like, be close. But for us, it's like the war felt like eternity, really, right? It felt like it went on for years and years and years, because you lost that hope of looking for somebody to save you, right? So, but I, like, for me, I know. So when I hear about these things, right, you can put it into perspective. You can kind of, if they talk about, oh, this person was beheaded, you can visually kind of like see that, right? So, but I think maybe for us nowadays, you kind of really need to physically see these things before you realize that it's true. But like, hearing these stories is very real, because people's lives are being completely changed, right? So I feel like for most of us, because we lived in communities that were so close, and we had never seen things like that, it was hard for people to believe that. Like in the city, people didn't really believe that until the war kind of like came to their front doors, right? But even them, like, there was not a lot they could really do, right? Because civilians blended in with the rebels, and it's just like, where do you even start? Like, they used to brand people. They used to put our Revolutionary United Front. They'll put RUF. They'll use like razor blades and they'll write it on your maybe the shoulders and everything like that. Sometimes that's how you kind of knew who was kind of like taken or who was a rebel, right? But people blended in each other. So I feel like, you know, we should really kind of like listen to these stories that are being told, right? We don't really always need to see someone getting their heads cut off a couple of times before you kind of like realize that, hey, let's at least pay attention, or let's do a bit of research and kind of look into this, and let's talk to our friends. I have a couple of friends. I have Faven as a friend of mine, and we kind of talk about these things all the time. So I've gotten a chance to kind of like share some of my stories with her, right? So being that close, that's someone I can probably go to and talk to about this, and she can educate me some more. And then I have you as well, right? So this is good. I feel like we need that, and we need things like this to start.
As Africans, we need to learn from each other, because so many killings have happened. At some point, we have to say enough is enough. We should not be used as propaganda. I mean, I always say sometimes it's not really the ethnic or the religion that's a problem. It's like not having work. I mean, being a poor country, you can guide, like you said it, you can pick any kid and tell him to do A, B, C, D, because he has nothing better to do.
Yeah. If you can give somebody food, money that will give them food to eat, right? Because like I went to Sierra Leone, and you'll be walking around, you see how many youths kind of just like, they do the same thing all day. They'll get up, hang around somewhere, and argue all day, and then they disperse at the end of the night. And then same thing again the morning you're walking by, you see them. So it's just like, if any circumstances like what happened in the past happens again, it's very easy for somebody to pick up arms, because once you have that gun, you can get away with so much. Like it's crazy how many, and it's scary, really. Like till this day, like I'm still kind of like afraid for my country, because like someday I would want to go back home, and I do go back home frequently, right? So I want my children to know where I came from, right? And when things like that are hanging over a country, it's hard to kind of like overlook it. And right now, the video I watched, quite similar to what happened in Rwanda, right? So it's just like, if people just turn a blind eye to it, is the scale of the violence is going to just keep growing. So this is important here. And
you mentioned one of the things that really disturbed me. Really, I couldn't sleep after I talked to you. You talked about, if you can talk to the audience, when the rebels talked about bringing a gift.
Okay. Yeah, so that was around that same time, like I told you guys the story about the lady carrying her loved one in a basket. So after doing these kind of acts, and then the young man whose head was placed on the spike, right? So they did all these little acts, and then there was a point in time where that same kind of announcement that they do, because the town is pretty small, that you can usually, let's say like people were calling a meeting, right? You can go from one end of the town. Someone can even kind of like just yell out and people can hear, because the street is here, houses are here, houses are there. So the rebels kind of went around making an announcement that they had a gift for us. And at that point in time, nobody was allowed to go, not even to the farm, because there was a point in time they let us go to our farms, and at least you can go get some rice, cook it, and then bring it back home, and your family can have that for the next couple of days, right? So, but then they stopped doing that. There was a point in time nobody was allowed to go anywhere. That was that same time that man was cut into pieces. So they were like, they had a gift, and everybody was kind of skeptical, but others were like, oh, maybe these rebels are like being kind, maybe they are changing after all, right? So that evening, you know, my parents and everybody else, like the neighbors were kind of like gathered around and talking about, you know, what do you think is going to be? You know, and talking amongst themselves. So the morning came, you know, and where we gathered was like a roundabout. So people started slowly kind of like walking to the roundabout in the kind of like the center of the town, really. So, and they made a circle, right? So, and when we got there, there was a white truck. In the truck, there was this huge, big wooden box, square wooden box, was pretty big, just at the back of the truck. And people just started kind of like finding their own positions when they came slowly. And then one of the rebels kind of went ahead to give a speech. So they went, you know, was talking like, we're sorry for what we have been doing to you guys. And we feel like, you know, things are going to change from here on. And, you know, we just wanted to give you guys this gift, you know, as a way of showing that things are going to change. So we're just standing there. And then I remember a few of them jumped onto the truck, and then they were pulling this box, which seemed to be very heavy, right? So, and then they placed that box at the very middle, where everyone could see it. And, you know, one of them went ahead and opened the box. And what they had in this box was decapitated individuals, people whose heads were cut off, and then they placed all of that in the box, and they asked us to laugh at it. So, and at that very point in time, people were just crying. And myself, I was crying. Like, I was standing here, my mother was standing right behind me. So, and, you know, I was kind of looking in the box, and you could see like some of the eyes were like still open, right? So, and they were going around, like I was crying. So they came with the gun, and they were pointing the gun right at me, and they were yelling at my mother, make him laugh. So I remember my mother squeezed my shoulder so hard. So I was kind of like laughing and crying at the same time. And that's what everyone was doing. And it's just these kind of acts you cannot forget, right? But sometimes you put it at the back of your mind, and, you know, you have a life to live, right? You know, so, but we don't want things like this to happen in other countries where, you know, innocent lives are being lost in that manner, right? So it's good to get to it before it becomes what it did for us.
Thank you for sharing this. Like I said, I cannot imagine, but just you and telling me what it looks like. It looks like something that we just see in a horror movie that we think like it's not real, but you experienced it, and so many kids at that moment experienced it. And I'm glad you came out. And I know it does require a lot of strength, a lot of prayer in you to be able to survive this. I believe there is a poem that you have that you can read for us while you're getting that ready. I mean, I want to say a few things. I mean,
okay, for sure. Yeah.
It just for all of us, I mean, especially for those Ethiopians who are watching right now, we need to be careful. We can learn from other countries. I mean, what my brother Abdul is telling us, they were neighbors together. One day they decided just to go around. They could cut heads and not feel it. They could drag bodies all over the street, or they could go in and take eyes out from neighbors, friends, and families, thinking they belong to a different ethnic, they belong to a different religion, and I don't care. Those people, you're going to regret it. I mean, at some point, you're going to have a life. How are you going to be able to grow up and have kids and be able to tell them what? At this age, when I was 15, 20, 30, I went around and killed people. I went around, cut heads. I went around, dragged bodies in the street. Is that the story that you want to tell to your kids? How are you going to be able to live with that? So let's think. The people who are telling you to do these things are not there with you. So you need to be able to listen. Let's discuss this. There is no point of being this barbaric and go around to kill people in the manners that we are killing them. So please, let's stop doing that. Go ahead, Abdul, please, if you can read your poem.
Okay. So the poem is titled, the spoken word is titled, We Do Not Remember. We do not remember. We do not remember the diamonds that glowed on fingers, but we remember the blood that trickled from bodies unrecognizable. Do not remember the echoes of your voices from ages past, over AK-47s, wailing at our unborn children. We do not remember the ghost of Leopold any longer, over voices reminding us never to forget, and never again while Black bodies littered the streets of Rwanda. But still men spent their days deciphering a single word, genocide. Long before 800,000 bodies became memories, we do not remember the silence, the pigment of our skin, for see, we are human first. And Black second, we do not remember the silence, the roles played in tribal violence, the instigations and manipulations we do not remember. To whom forgiveness was given, we no longer ponder with grieving hearts, wondering if someday you will remember us. We no longer count the amount of bodies we have buried in your absence, in wars against brothers who were once dear to our hearts. We do not count the senseless violence that turned our valleys red from mountains of corpses. We do not count the many orphans who roam the streets by night with hungry bellies, oblivious to the silent wars waged from afar. For the land that I am from, decaying corpses could never flee from the sun, neither the flies that hover the shallow fields. The wind, unable to break free, carried the smell of the dead, as we ran from brothers from whom we fled. To the holy book some turned, to adhere just what was said in commandments of 10, long before our brothers bled. For in the land that I am from, in the absence of dogs, when corpses the vultures fed, but in the wars that we have waged, see, the dead is only remembered long after the regrets of men, pondering on countless violence of which the world has always known. For the darkest days that we have seen were crafted by heartless beings. So in the eyes of time, see, love may never find our deeds worthy, but I pray forgiveness may. That's it.
Thank you, Abdul. That's very, very beautiful.
Thank you very much for having me.
Poem and the way to end it. So with that, I love also the title that you picked. Your voice for the poem, really, really perfect. What would you tell first, before you tell an advice to others, the little boy that remembers?
Yeah.
What would you tell the little boy, the little self, yourself?
Yeah.
What would be the story? What would be the message that you would have for that boy?
So, I his experience made me into the man I am today. And for me, having grown up to go through that, shaped the way I look at like the world, right? And I look at humanity. So, and I'm more grateful for life itself, right? So, and I'll tell him that the world is bigger than he thought, right? So, because for me, I always thought, what he went through was normal, and going to pick mangoes, you stone the mango, it drops underneath the tree, and then it's like a bushy area. You go to pick up the mangoes, and you see a human bone and human skull, and you pick up your mango and go about your business. Is something that is not normal, that I learned when I came here. So, I'll tell him that to cherish the moments that he knew love, and he was loved, and to cherish the time he had with his brothers. So, but yeah, I'm grateful for the person I have become, and yeah.
Thank you. That's powerful. In the same sentence, what message would you have? There are kids right now, like you said, being told by propaganda and going around killing and destroying, burning down homes. What message would you have for them? Like, because they think this is it right now. They don't think about 20 years from now, 30 years from now, what they will become. So what message would you have for them right now? What are they missing?
So the very place that you are committing this violence is a place that belongs to you and the person that you're committing the act against, right? So at some point in time, the destruction that you cause is not going to be able to kind of like get back to what it once was, right? So like I said, the country, Sierra Leone, is still recovering from the war itself, right? So, and at some point in time, whatever violence it is that you commit, you're going to go back into that community where you're going to live amongst the people who you once saw as different, or who you once saw as not being human, right? So it's just like these kind of things you cannot run from. And the destruction that you're causing are people who look like you. And at some point in time, you're going to realize that there's no difference, right? And by the time you realize, it's going to be too late, right? You're going to be in a place where you can never recover. So, you know, I don't want to be mushy and preach love, but it's very important, right? Because Africa has always known these kind of violence, and it's just something that we need to kind of like move from, and stop seeing each other as different. You know, these lines, these borders that we see, you know, we are all human beings, and it's just good for us to continue to think that way. And I feel like that's the advice I would give to.
Thank you very much, Abdul. Took a lot
to
come in and share your story.
Thank you for having me.
Because I'm hoping people will learn from this. So I thank you, and
no problem.
all my people.
Okay.
Please understand, just like Abdul said, they went through it, it didn't help. This is something that you're going to own. This is not a cause that you're going to do. At the end of the day, you are the one doing the killing. You could talk about a cause, you could talk about an ethnic, you could talk about any reason why you are doing it. At the end of the day, it's your hands, it's your mind, it's your thinking who is committing that crime. And you're doing it to the people who are running away. You think right now they are weak because you have more numbers, or you doing it because as a bully, because you have so many people around you, you think like you have the force, and then you're going around and doing the killings. But at the end of the day, you are the one committing this terror, this killings. You cannot blame it on someone else telling you to do it. You have a life. If you think about yourself 20 years, 30 years from now, you're going to be older. You're going to have a future. You're going to have your own kids. You don't want your story to be, I was a killer. I went around and killed. I went around and burned down houses. Those people who do that, they don't want a future. If you believe you want a future by going around and killing, I don't think your kids will be proud of you. Nobody will be proud of you by telling like, I was able to catch someone else's head. I was able to drag bodies on the street. Nobody was born with an ethnic. Nobody was born with a religion. When we were born, we come naked. When we die, we go naked. And we don't bring our religion. We don't bring our wealth. We don't bring our language. We bring nothing. When we die, it would end. So let us please think and be responsible. We cannot blame the neighbors. We cannot blame your friends. You cannot blame the political party who's making you do this. You are doing it. You are responsible. And you can stop it. You can say no. You can disagree. You can say you're different ethnics or whatever, but you don't need to kill. You don't need to drag bodies. So please stop it before it's too late. So once again, I pray all of us think about these things and learn from each other, learn from Africa, learn from Sierra Leone, learn from Abdul's story, what he has gone through. And I pray that all of us understand there is no need to turn it into a barbaric killer. So once again, thank you. I leave you with peace. Let's think about this. Let's try to take care of each other. Once again, Abdul, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
In collaboration with Abba Media. Until I see you on the next show on Saturday, I wish you all a good night.